The eviction notice shook in Rachel Carter's hands as she stood in her quiet cafe, her dark eyes brimming with tears. The bold red letters screamed under the dim light above her head, "Final notice, 48 hours to vacate." Her dream, 5 years in the making, was collapsing right in front of her. Tomorrow, she'd have to break the news to her 3 employees that their jobs were gone. Soon, her cafe, her pride, her heart, would be nothing but another empty storefront on Maple Street. Rachel carefully folded the notice and set it beside the register before moving through her closing routine one last time. Chairs were stacked neatly on tables, the floor swept spotless, machines powered down and wiped clean. Everything was ready, almost as if the cafe itself knew this might be her final night as its owner. A sharp knock at the front door jolted her. She glanced at the clock, 11:47 p.m. Who in the world wanted coffee at this hour? Through the glass, she spotted a tall, sharply dressed white man in a tailored suit. His dark hair was a little unruly, his green eyes urgent. "We're closed," Rachel called through the door. "Please," he said, his voice muffled but earnest. "I need to talk to you. It's Daniel Hayes. I've been coming here for weeks." Recognition clicked. He was the quiet man who always ordered a plain black coffee at 7:30 sharp each morning and left a generous tip. Never a problem, always polite. Rachel had noticed him, his expensive suits, the way he seemed to carry the weight of heavy decisions. Against her better judgment, she unlocked the door just enough to speak. "Mr. Hayes, right? I remember you. But we're closed, and I've got to finish up. I know about your cafe," he said quickly. "I know about the eviction notice. I know you've got 48 hours before this place is gone." Her chest tightened. "How do you?" "Because I've been watching," he admitted. "For 3 weeks, every morning. I've seen how much this place means to you and to everyone who walks in. The joy on people's faces, the way you remember every name and order. This cafe isn't just a business. It's a community. And it's about to disappear." Rachel opened the door wider, too tired to keep up her defenses. "Yes. The landlord raised rent 60% with only 30 days' notice. I've tried everything, loans, family, friends. Nothing worked." Daniel stepped inside. The cafe felt different at night. No chatter, no bustle. Just silence, intimate, bittersweet. "What if I told you there was another way?" he asked softly. "I'd say you don't understand commercial rent around here," Rachel replied, trying to smile. "Unless you've got $50,000 lying around, you can't help." Daniel studied her face for a long moment. "Actually, I do. And I want to help you save this place." She stared at him, sure she misheard. "Excuse me? I have the money. And I want to invest in your cafe. But first I need you to sit down and hear me out. Please." Rachel's gaze swept over the cafe, the walls she painted herself, the mismatched thrift store furniture, the chalkboard menu written in her own careful handwriting. This place wasn't just a business. It was her heart, her proof that she could build something meaningful. "Fine," she whispered, pulling down 2 chairs. "I'll listen." They sat across from each other. Daniel leaned forward, hands clasped. "My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm the CEO of Hayes Development Group. We build commercial properties across the city." Rachel froze. She'd heard of them. One of the biggest companies in the state. Daniel continued, his voice low. "I've been successful, yes. But truthfully, nothing I've built has ever felt like home. Not until I started coming here. Your cafe is everything a community should be, warm, welcoming, real. People belong here. And I don't want to see it vanish." Rachel swallowed hard. "That's very kind. But how does that change my situation?" "I want to be your business partner," Daniel said simply. "I'll pay the back rent, cover the increased lease for the next 2 years, and invest in renovations. In return, I'd own 30%. You stay the majority owner, the heart of this place." Her head spun. "You'd give me money, to save my cafe?" I want to invest in something that matters. For years I've built shopping centers and office towers. But those don't bring people together. This does. You do. Rachel searched his face for hidden motives. All she saw was sincerity. Why would you do this for someone you barely know? Daniel smiled faintly. Because sometimes you find a place, or a person, that changes how you see the world. This cafe, and the way you run it, has done that for me. For the first time in months, Rachel felt hope. Real, tangible hope. Tears welled again, but now they were filled with gratitude, not despair. You'd really do this? She whispered. If you'll let me. She took a shaky breath, looked around her cafe again, and saw possibilities instead of endings. Yes, she said, her voice firming. Yes, I'll accept. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Thank you for giving me hope when I had none left. He smiled, and it transformed his face. Please call me Daniel. And thank you, Rachel, for letting me be part of something beautiful. At nearly midnight, in the warm quiet of Sunrise Cafe, surrounded by the fading scent of coffee and pastries, something shifted for both of them. Neither could have guessed a morning coffee habit would lead to this moment. So, Rachel said softly, what happens now? No, Daniel replied. We save your cafe. And maybe discover that sometimes, the best things happen when you least expect them. Daniel knew Rachel would be cautious about an offer like his, especially from someone she'd only really known for 2 weeks. So he didn't push. Instead, he stayed longer that morning, ordering a pastry and settling at his usual table with a newspaper. From there, he watched her move through her work. She poured herself into every detail, every interaction. He noticed how she made each cup of coffee with extra care, how she remembered little things about people's lives, and how she always seemed to solve problems with quiet creativity. When Mrs. Chen mentioned her arthritis was acting up, Rachel slipped her a cushion without being asked. When a college student's laptop battery died, she pointed him to a charging station she kept behind the counter. When a mother walked in with a fussy baby, Rachel warmed a bottle and led her to a quiet corner table. You're very good at this, Daniel said later, setting his empty cup on the counter. At making coffee? Rachel asked with a teasing smile. At making people feel cared for, he replied. Rachel's smile softened. That's the point, isn't it? Life's hard enough. Why should people treat each other like strangers? The next morning, Tuesday, Daniel arrived to find Rachel frowning at the espresso machine. It wheezed and sputtered, pulling weak shots. Trouble? He asked. This thing's 12 years old. Rachel sighed, patting the side of the machine like an old friend. I bought it used when I opened. It's been loyal, but I think it's finally giving up. What happens if it dies completely? I'll pray it doesn't. A decent machine costs $15,000 or more. Might as well be $1 million right now. Daniel made a mental note. Later that day, between meetings, he was glued to his phone, researching espresso machines, grinders, and financing options. By that afternoon, he knew enough to talk shop like a barista. On Wednesday, he brought it up casually. I was thinking about what you said about your espresso machine. Have you considered refurbished equipment? Some companies rebuild them like new for about half the cost. Rachel's eyes lit up. Really? I hadn't even thought about that. Do you know anything about it? I've been learning, Daniel admitted. I could send you some resources. That would be wonderful. Thank you. At lunch, Daniel pulled together a list of reputable dealers and financing programs, emailing it to her with a note that was careful not to sound overbearing. By Thursday, Rachel greeted him with excitement. I called 3 of those places. One has a restored machine that'd be perfect, and they offer payment plans. I never knew these options existed. I'm glad I could help, Daniel said sincerely. You've been so kind, Rachel said. Most customers just order and leave. You actually listen. You care. This place matters to me, Daniel admitted quietly. And he meant it. Friday night, he did something even he didn't expect. Instead of dining in some high-end restaurant, he showed up at the cafe for acoustic music night, something Rachel had mentioned often. The cafe felt transformed. Warm lamps and candlelight replaced the bright fluorescence. About 30 people filled the room, sitting on chairs, couches, even the floor. A young woman strummed a guitar in the corner, her voice filling the space with tender folk songs. Rachel moved gracefully among the crowd, serving drinks and desserts. She had traded her work clothes for a flowing skirt and a soft sweater, looking more radiant than ever. When she spotted Daniel alone at a back table, her expression brightened with genuine surprise. "You stayed," she said, stepping over during a break. "I wanted to see what I've been missing," he replied. "And?" Daniel looked around the room, at the laughter, the music, the people coming together. "I think this is what the world should look like more often." Rachel smiled, sitting across from him. "That's why I started these nights. We're all too isolated these days, trapped in our own bubbles. Music brings people back together." "How did you learn to create all this?" Daniel asked. "The cafe, these events, the way you make people feel at home." Rachel's eyes softened. "I grew up in a house where the door was always open. My grandmother used to say food and kindness could solve most of the world's problems. She taught me that the most important thing you can do is create a place where people feel welcome." She sounds wise. She was. She passed away 2 years ago. But I still hear her voice when I make decisions here. She would have loved tonight. Daniel felt an ache in his chest. He had grown up with business dinners, transactional relationships, and calculated deals. What Rachel described was foreign to him, and yet, it felt like something he'd been missing all his life. "I envy you," he said softly. "Why? You know who you are. You know what matters. You've built something real." Rachel studied him in the candlelight. "And you? What matters to you?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I'm still figuring that out." The music began again, and they listened in silence. Daniel found himself stealing glances at her, drawn to the way she encouraged the musician, smiled at strangers, radiated warmth. When the night ended, he stayed to help her clean up, stacking chairs and wiping tables. "You don't have to," Rachel said. "I want to," he answered simply. As they worked, Daniel realized he felt more at peace here, cleaning a small cafe at 11 p.m., than he ever did in his penthouse or corner office. Rachel hummed softly as she worked, and the sound stirred something deep inside him. Contentment. "Thank you for staying," Rachel said at the end. "It means a lot that you care." "Thank you," Daniel replied, "for creating a place where people like me can remember what community feels like." Walking home through the quiet streets, Daniel knew something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just a customer anymore. He cared about this cafe, and about Rachel. He was falling in love. Not with profit, not with success, not with appearances. But with kindness. With connection. With the possibility of building a life around something that truly mattered. The question was, how far was he willing to go to protect it? Monday morning, Rachel unlocked the cafe at 6 a.m. and found an official letter slipped under the door. Her stomach dropped as she read it for the third time. Notice of rent increase. Effective in 30 days, monthly rent will rise from $3,200 to $5,120. A 60% increase. Rachel sank into a chair, the letter trembling in her hands. She was already struggling to cover her current rent. This would crush her. No matter how she spun the numbers, it wasn't possible. She had 30 days to pull off a miracle or give up the dream she'd poured her life into. The bell above the door chimed. Mrs. Chen arrived, cheerful as always. Rachel stuffed the letter into her apron and forced a smile. "Morning, Mrs. Chen. The usual Earl Grey with honey? You know me too well," the older woman said, settling by the window. Rachel went through the motions, but inside she was drowning. She clung to one thought, 7:30. Daniel would come at 7:30. And today, more than ever, she needed that steady presence. When he walked in, Rachel already had his Colombian coffee ready. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked gently. Rachel hesitated. Normally, she kept her burdens private. But something about his voice made her open up. "Actually, no. I got some bad news this morning." "What happened?" Rachel glanced around. Too many ears nearby. "Later," she said softly. "I've got to get through the rush." "I'll be here," Daniel assured her. For the next hour, Rachel worked mechanically. She brewed coffee, handed out pastries, and forced smiles, but her brain raced with impossible math. A second job? A miracle loan? Begging the landlord? Nothing added up. Finally, when the rush died down, Daniel came back to the counter. "Now tell me." Rachel pulled the folded letter from her apron and slid it to him. Daniel's eyes darkened as he read. 60%? With 30 days' notice? That's outrageous. Barely legal. Rachel muttered bitterly. "And I can't afford lawyers to fight it." "What will you do?" "I don't know. I've been crunching numbers all morning. There's no version of this that works. Even if I raised prices 50%, I'd lose customers, and still fall short." "Who's your landlord?" "Morrison Property Management. They bought the building 6 months ago." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Morrison. I know them. They're notorious for this. They buy up older buildings, jack up the rent, force out small businesses, and then lease to chains who can afford it." Rachel felt her heart sink. So this was the plan all along. They never intended to let me stay. Probably not. He paused, then leaned closer. "But maybe there are options you haven't thought of." "Like what?" "Like an investor. Someone who believes in this cafe, and in you, enough to keep it alive." Rachel blinked. "Do you know someone?" "Maybe," Daniel said carefully. "Would you be open to a partner?" "At this point, I'd consider anything that would save this place," she admitted. The bell above the door chimed, cutting off the conversation. Customers poured in, but Rachel's thoughts stayed fixed on Daniel's words. A partner. Could she really share her cafe, the dream she'd built with her own hands? Or was that the only way to keep it alive? A family-run diner that had served the neighborhood for 20 years was now a gleaming Starbucks. The little bookstore that once held author readings and kids' story hours had been gutted and turned into a chain clothing store. The flower shop Rachel used to buy arrangements from for her cafe had been replaced by a cell phone outlet. Was this the future? She wondered. Would every unique, personal place be erased, swapped out for chains with headquarters hundreds of miles away? Rachel returned to her cafe with more determination than before. She wasn't ready to let Sunrise Cafe become another casualty. While prepping for the afternoon rush, she thought hard about Daniel's words. If he truly did know an investor, maybe, just maybe, that was her only chance. But her distraction showed. She fumbled orders, remade drinks, and her regulars noticed. "You feeling all right, hon?" one asked gently. Rachel forced a smile. "Just a little tired." But inside she was unraveling. At closing time, she sat alone at a table, scribbling numbers on a yellow legal pad. No matter how she twisted them, the math was brutal. Even if someone put up the capital, the new rent would devour nearly everything. Supplies, wages, improvements, there'd be nothing left. Her phone rang. It was her sister calling from Atlanta. "Hey, how's business?" her sister asked, cheerful as ever. Rachel almost confessed, but the words stuck in her throat. "It's fine. How are the kids?" They chatted 20 minutes about family and school recitals. When the call ended, Rachel felt more alone than before. Her family loved her, but they were far away and carrying their own burdens. She couldn't ask them for money. She locked up the cafe and trudged back to her small apartment, the rent notice heavy in her pocket. For the first time since opening, she let herself picture life without Sunrise Cafe. She could work at another coffeehouse, sure, but it wouldn't be hers. She could move to a cheaper town, but this community had become her life. Start over at 31? The thought was crushing. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, mind racing, head aching. She had poured herself into creating something beautiful. She had proven a small place could thrive on kindness, quality, and care. Would it all vanish because of greed and a broken system? Sometime before dawn, she made a choice. Tomorrow, she'd ask Daniel about his investor. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. She didn't know that across town, Daniel was also wide awake in his penthouse. He had spent hours digging into Morrison Property Management, confirming what he suspected. They weren't just raising rents, they were dismantling neighborhoods one lease at a time. He had the resources to fight them, to save Rachel's cafe, but would she even accept his help once she learned who he really was? By morning, both of them knew the next day would change everything. Tuesday carried a different weight. Rachel felt it the moment she turned the key in the cafe door. She had made her decision. It scared her, but it was something. When Daniel walked in at 7:30, she already had his Colombian coffee brewing. "Colombian again?" she asked, steadying her tone. "Please," Daniel said, his eyes studying her. "You look like you didn't sleep much." Rachel slid the cup across the counter. "I've been thinking. Yesterday, you mentioned an investor. If you really know someone who might be interested, I want to meet them." Daniel didn't drink right away. He set the cup down and held her gaze. "There's something I need to tell you first. Something I should have told you weeks ago." A ripple of anxiety ran through Rachel. "What is it? Can we sit?" "It'll take a minute." They moved to his usual window table, the cafe still quiet before the rush. Daniel folded his hands, looked her squarely in the eye, and said, "When you asked about my work, I told you I was in commercial real estate. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth." Rachel's stomach tightened. "I'm Daniel Hayes, CEO of Hayes Development Corporation." Her breath caught. Everyone in the city knew that name. Hayes Development had built half the skyline, and had pushed out more than a few mom-and-pop shops along the way. "You're telling me," she started, trying to piece it together, "you're one of the people changing this neighborhood?" "Yes," he said plainly. "And I know how that sounds, especially with what's happening to your rent." Rachel leaned back, studying him as though seeing him for the first time. "Why hide it?" "Because I didn't want you to stop talking to me. I didn't want you to see me only as part of the problem." "Are you?" she asked sharply. Daniel was silent for a long beat, then nodded. "I have been. For 10 years I built projects without thinking about the people they displaced. I chased profit, ignored the cost to community. But then I started coming here. Watching what you've built, how you treat people, how much this place means, it's changed me." Rachel's chest tightened as she listened. "When I suggested finding an investor," Daniel continued, "I meant me. I want to help save Sunrise Cafe. Not as a deal. Not as a write-off. Because this place has shown me what real development should look like, building community, not just buildings." "You want to invest in my cafe?" she asked, voice caught between disbelief and caution. "I want to be your partner, if you'll let me. You'd stay the majority owner. You'd run it your way. I'd provide the capital to cover the rent increase and improvements. I'd be a silent partner, advising when you need it, backing you up financially, but never taking away what makes this yours." Rachel blinked dizzy. "How much money are we even talking about?" "Enough to cover rent increases for 5 years. Plus new equipment, marketing, a cushion for hard times. Roughly $500,000. Her mouth went dry. $500,000! More than she had earned in 5 years combined. Daniel shrugged lightly. "It's less than I spend on a single small project. For you, it's everything. For me, it's a chance to be part of something that matters." The bell above the door jingled. Mrs. Chen walked in. Rachel excused herself, but her hands trembled as she poured the tea. "You okay, dear?" Mrs. Chen asked, watching her carefully. "Just a little tired," Rachel said, managing a smile. When the rush eased, she returned to the table. "Why, Daniel?" Really? You barely know me. Daniel paused, choosing his words. Do you remember Friday night? You said your grandmother taught you that food and kindness could solve most of the world's problems. Rachel nodded slowly. My father taught me something different, Daniel said quietly. That business was about winning, about control, about always having more than the next guy. Success was measured in ownership and power. And I believed that, until I came here. Until I saw you solve problems with kindness, create wealth that isn't about money. Belonging. Joy. Connection. You showed me a better way. Investing in you isn't guilt. It's the smartest thing I could do for my own life. Rachel studied him. What she saw wasn't arrogance. It was sincerity. And maybe even hope. If I said yes, she asked carefully, what would this look like? A legal partnership. You'd make the daily decisions. You'd have final say on staff, menu, pricing, everything that gives Sunrise Cafe its heart. I'd offer guidance on big financial choices. If the cafe thrives, and I believe it will, there's room to grow. Expansion, maybe? But only if you want it. Rachel's pulse quickened at the possibilities. But the weight of it pressed down too. I need time, she admitted. Of course, Daniel said warmly. Take all the time you need. But remember, you've got 28 days before that rent hike kicks in. The morning rush surged, cutting their conversation short. As Rachel worked, she kept sneaking glances at him. He looked as calm as always, sipping coffee, jotting notes on his phone. But she knew nothing was the same. The quiet man with the black coffee wasn't just a customer. He was a millionaire offering her a lifeline. But what did he really want in return? At lunch, she researched Hayes' development. Their portfolio was impressive, sleek buildings, high praise. Some articles lauded them for revitalizing neighborhoods, creating jobs. Others condemned them for gutting communities. By closing time, Rachel had reached one conclusion. Daniel's offer might be the only path forward. But tomorrow, she would demand clarity, about his expectations, about what he truly wanted. As she locked up, one truth settled deep in her chest. 2 days ago she thought she'd lost everything. Now she was weighing whether to trust a man who could either save her dream, or destroy it. Wednesday morning, she was ready. She had a napkin covered in scribbled notes, questions, scenarios. She had even called her old college roommate for advice, though she couldn't bring herself to explain everything. When Daniel arrived at 7:30, she handed him his coffee and led him straight to a corner table. I've been thinking about your offer, Rachel said, her voice steady. And I have a lot of questions. Daniel nodded. Then ask me anything. Daniel appreciated Rachel's no-nonsense approach. Honestly, he said, I want to be part of something that matters. For 10 years I've built buildings without building community. I want to use what I know, my skills, my resources, to create the kind of place I wish existed more often. Rachel arched an eyebrow. That sounds pretty idealistic for a CEO. Maybe it does, Daniel admitted. But if idealism gets results, then it's just good business, with a conscience. Rachel scribbled a note on her napkin. All right. What kind of return would you expect? I'd expect Sunrise Cafe to become profitable enough to sustain itself and pay modest dividends, Daniel answered. I'm not looking for windfall profits. But I wouldn't want to subsidize losses forever either. This needs to be a working business, not just a charity project. She nodded slowly. And how much control would you want over daily operations? Almost none, Daniel said firmly. You know this community better than I ever could. You're the heart of this cafe. My role would be capital, strategy when you ask for it, and maybe support if expansion becomes possible. Rachel checked off another item. What if we disagree about something big? We'd put it in writing, Daniel said. You'd have final say on everything customer-facing, menu, staff, cafe culture. I'd weigh in on financial moves, leases, expansion. And if we hit a wall, we'd bring in a mediator. Simple. Rachel nodded. And if one of us wants out? Buy clauses. Daniel replied without hesitation. If you walk away, you can buy me out at fair market value. If I walk away, you get first rights before I sell to anyone else. Rachel was impressed. You've done this before. Structured plenty of partnerships, Daniel said with a shrug. The secret is aligning interests and protecting both sides. The bell over the door jingled as customers began filtering in. Rachel glanced toward the counter, torn between their conversation and her regulars. Go, Daniel said gently. I'll be right here. For the next hour, Rachel poured coffee, served pastries, and smiled at neighbors, while replaying Daniel's answers in her head. Everything sounded reasonable, even generous. And yet, she couldn't shake the instinct to be cautious. When the cafe finally quieted, she slid back into the chair across from him. One last question, she said. The most important one. Daniel leaned forward. Go on. What happens to you if this doesn't work? If the cafe fails, if the partnership falls apart, if I turn out to be terrible at this, what then? Daniel smiled softly. Then I'll have lost some money and gained some lessons. I can afford the loss. What I can't afford is to pass up the chance to be part of what you've built here. I make more in a month than this investment costs me. If the worst thing that happens is that I lose money trying to save something I care about, I'll call it a win. Rachel put her napkin down and met his eyes. Okay. I accept your offer. Daniel's face broke into a wide, genuine grin. Really? Really. But there are conditions. Name them. First, everything in writing. And my lawyer reviews it. Of course. My team will draft it, but you should absolutely have your lawyer go over it. Second, we start small. 1 year. A trial. Then we revisit. Smart. We'll add a clause to extend if it's working. Third, Rachel said firmly, I want full transparency about your other projects. If Hayes Development is working on anything that could touch this neighborhood, I want to know. Daniel nodded without hesitation. Fair. And Rachel, this partnership could actually shift the way my company does business. Working with you might help us move toward building communities instead of tearing them apart. That would be great, Rachel said. But first, let's save this cafe. They shook hands across the table, and for the first time in months, Rachel felt a crushing weight lift. Sunrise Cafe wasn't doomed. Not anymore. How are you feeling about this? Daniel asked softly. Like I can finally breathe. Rachel admitted. But why is this so important to you? I get the community angle, but there's more, isn't there? Daniel paused, choosing his words. Remember the first Friday I stayed for the music night? Rachel nodded. That night, watching you move through the room, welcoming everyone, making people feel seen, it was the first time in years I realized life could be lived differently. Better. Rachel tilted her head. What do you mean? I've been successful, Daniel said slowly. I've had the money, the projects, the power. But I've also been lonely. I've had deals, not friendships. Buildings, not connections. Possessions, but not experiences. And then I came here. This place, and you. It showed me what I've been missing. Service. Belonging. Community. Rachel felt her chest tighten. That's a beautiful thing to say. I'm not trying to be poetic, Daniel said with a small smile. Just honest. Partnering with you isn't charity. It's about finally being part of something bigger than myself. When Daniel left for work and Rachel returned to her counter, they both carried a quiet anticipation about what was coming. For Rachel, it was stability, growth, and the chance to dream bigger. For Daniel, it was purpose and a chance to rewrite his legacy. Word spread fast. By Friday, Mrs. Chim was asking nosy questions about that nice man helping out. And the college kids had already heard about you money saving the cafe. Rachel decided not to hide it. She wrote a sign and taped it by the register. Thanks to a community-minded investor, Sunrise Cafe will remain open and growing. Thank you all for supporting local. The response was immediate. Customers hugged her, telling stories of what the cafe meant to them. New faces showed up, eager to support the place they'd heard was worth saving. Daniel arrived to find the busiest rush in months. "This is unbelievable," he said, finally reaching the counter. "I had to wait 10 minutes in line." Word got out, Rachel said, beaming as she poured his coffee. "People are thrilled we're not going anywhere." "Have you thought about how you'll use all this momentum?" Daniel asked. "Actually, yes," Rachel said, pulling out a worn notebook she'd been filling with ideas. She flipped it open, her excitement bubbling. Cooking classes, small business workshops, longer art exhibits. Things I've always wanted but never had the space or money for. Daniel leaned in, studying her notes. Some of these could generate real revenue while deepening community. Cooking classes especially. You think people would sign up? Rachel laughed. Are you kidding? Customers ask for my recipes every single day. A monthly class would probably sell out. And for the first time in weeks, Rachel felt excited about the future. What about the business workshops? Rachel asked one night, flipping through her notebook of ideas. I know so many people who dream of starting something of their own but don't even know where to start. I could help with those, Daniel offered. Between the two of us, we've got both the creative and the business side covered. You'd bring the heart, I'd bring the numbers. They spent the next hour mapping out plans. Weekend cooking classes. Evening business workshops. Art exhibitions with opening nights. Book clubs featuring local authors. This is starting to feel like more than a cafe, Daniel said, leaning back in his chair. That's the point, Rachel replied with a smile. I've always wanted Sunrise to be a place where people don't just grab coffee and run, but where they come to learn, share, and connect. The following week brought one win after another. Daniel's attorney finalized the partnership agreement, which Rachel's own lawyer signed off on with only minor tweaks. Daniel also negotiated with Morrison Property Management, transforming what had been a 60% rent hike into a 25% increase, locked in with a 5-year lease and capped at 3% annual raises. How did you manage that? Rachel asked, half in disbelief. I pointed out all the legal holes in their original notice, Daniel said casually. And then I suggested they'd rather have a steady tenant than a court fight. You didn't threaten them, did you? She asked, raising an eyebrow. I didn't need to, he said with a grin. Sometimes the hint of a fight is enough. With the rent crisis solved, Rachel shifted her focus to upgrades. The top of the list was the aging espresso machine. Within days, Daniel had arranged delivery of a gleaming, state-of-the-art model. Customers gathered around as Rachel tested it, applauding when the first cup came out smoother and richer than ever. This is the best coffee you've ever made, Mr. Patterson, the retired professor, declared. And that's saying something, Mrs. Chen added warmly. Rachel even used the machine's steam wand to show off latte art, drawing cheers from the crowd. Word spread fast on social media, and by afternoon, the cafe was packed. I think we need to hire more staff, Daniel said during a quiet moment. I've been thinking the same thing, Rachel admitted. I know 2 people who'd be perfect. Within a week, Jennifer, a bright sociology graduate, and Marcus, a pastry chef fresh out of culinary school, joined the Sunrise team. Both believed in Rachel's vision and jumped at the chance to be part of something bigger than a job. The cafe's first cooking class, Rachel teaching her grandmother's sweet potato pie, sold out almost instantly. She'd expected maybe 8 sign-ups. Instead, 25 people crammed into the cafe kitchen. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter, shared stories, and hands covered in flour. This reminds me of my grandmother's dinner parties, one older woman said with a smile. That's exactly the feeling I wanted, Rachel said softly. By the end of class, half the participants were already signed up for her next workshop on homemade bread. Others asked about the business classes starting the following week. As she and Daniel stayed late cleaning up, him washing dishes, her stacking chairs, Rachel paused, looking around her bustling cafe. Thank you, she said suddenly. For what? He asked. For believing in this place. For taking a risk on me. For helping me turn this dream into something bigger than I ever imagined. Daniel smiled, his sleeves rolled up, soap suds still on his hands. No. Thank you. For showing me what community actually looks like. This partnership, it's the best decision I've made in years. Over the weeks that followed, the cafe grew into more than either of them had envisioned. Workshops filled up. New faces walked in daily. And through it all, Rachel and Daniel worked side by side. Long hours, late nights, deep conversations. One evening, 3 weeks later, they sat in the cafe at 9 p.m., surrounded by architectural sketches for the empty storefront they had just leased. It was going to become the Sunrise Community Kitchen. I can't believe we're actually doing this, Rachel said, shaking her head as she looked over the plans. Having second thoughts? Daniel asked, glancing up from his laptop. Not second thoughts. Just amazement. 6 weeks ago, I was terrified of losing everything. And now, here we are, expanding. That's what happens when good ideas finally meet enough resources, Daniel said with a grin. Rachel studied him for a moment. You know what I expected when we started this? What? I thought you'd want to change everything. Make it corporate. Profit over people. But instead, you've helped me do what I always wanted but never thought was possible. Daniel closed his laptop and leaned in. Can I tell you something? Of course. Working with you has been the most meaningful experience of my career. Not because of the profits, but because of how you think. You put people first. Always. Rachel smiled softly. That's my grandmother's influence. She always said business without heart is just selfishness dressed up in nice clothes. Daniel laughed. I wish I could have met her. Sounds like she would have told me off for how I used to run things. How did you used to run things? Efficiently. Profitably. Coldly. Daniel admitted. Everything measured in dollars. Nothing else. And now? Rachel asked. No, he said, his voice quiet. I've seen what business can look like when it's built around service. Around people. And you're the one who showed me that. Rachel noticed how close they were sitting, leaning over the same set of plans. The cafe was quiet, the hour late, and something shifted in the air. Daniel, she said softly. Yes? Are we still just talking about business? He met her eyes, steady and unflinching. I don't think we've been talking just about business for a while now. Her heart skipped. And what does that mean for us? I don't know, Daniel said honestly. But I do know this. I look forward to seeing you every morning more than anything else in my day. Talking to you makes me feel like the man I want to be. Your laugh makes me forget everything else. Rachel, I think I'm falling in love with you. Her breath caught. She'd been wrestling with the same feelings for weeks. I've been trying not to complicate our partnership, she whispered. And how's that going? He teased gently. Rachel laughed. Not very well. I think about you when you're not here. I save stories just to share with you. And I definitely dress better when I know we're working late together. So what do we do? Daniel asked. I don't know. I've never had feelings for a business partner. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Then maybe we don't figure it all out tonight. Maybe we just admit what's happening, and see where it leads. Rachel looked down at their hands, then back into his eyes. What if it doesn't work? What if it ruins everything we've built? What if it makes everything we've built even better? He countered softly. You're very optimistic for a businessman. She teased. I'm very optimistic about us. Daniel replied, squeezing her hand gently. Rachel felt her last defenses melt. Okay, she whispered. Okay, what? Okay, let's see where this leads. Later, as they stood by the cafe door, locking up, Rachel said quietly, I'm glad you knocked that night. I'm glad you let me in. Daniel replied. And in the warm glow of Sunrise Cafe, Surrounded by the scent of coffee and fresh pastries, they shared their first kiss, the kind that feels like both an ending and a beginning. 2 months into their relationship, Rachel and Daniel faced their first true test, not just as business partners, but as a couple. The trouble had a name: Marcus Whitfield. Whitfield was a local developer with a cutthroat reputation and a personal grudge against Daniel. For the past year, Marcus had lost out on several lucrative contracts to Pierce Development, and he blamed Daniel's supposed insider pull for every defeat. When word spread about Daniel's investment in Sunrise Cafe, Marcus saw his opening. The first warning sign came on a busy Friday morning. Rachel noticed a man in an expensive suit standing across the street, snapping photos of the cafe. He didn't try to hide it, but the moment she waved, he slipped into a black sedan and drove off. That was strange, she told Daniel when he arrived for his morning coffee. What kind of photos? Daniel asked. Mostly the exterior, signage, even the customer line. She hesitated. Do you think it was the city? Maybe some kind of inspection? Daniel frowned. I'll look into it. By Monday, things escalated. Rachel received a visit from Sarah Mitchell, a reporter from the City Business Journal. On the surface, Sarah claimed to be writing a feature on how big developers were supporting local businesses. But her questions didn't sit right. How did you and Mr. Hayes meet? Sarah asked with a thin smile. Rachel kept her answers professional, focusing on the cafe's mission and community programs. Then Sarah leaned in. Are you and Mr. Hayes romantically involved? Rachel's jaw tightened. I don't see how that's relevant to local business. Our readers love the human side of stories. Sarah pressed. And there are rumors. I think we're done here, Rachel said firmly, standing. Sarah left, snapping more photos on her way out. That afternoon, Daniel called. I know who's behind this, he said. Marcus Whitfield has been digging around. Who is he? Rachel asked. A competitor. One who doesn't take losing well. What kind of questions is he asking? Everything from our partnership terms to city compliance to us. He's fishing for dirt, Rachel. And he's not above dragging you into it. Rachel's stomach nodded. Is he trying to hurt the cafe? He's trying to hurt me, Daniel said grimly. But you might get caught in the crossfire. Over the next 2 weeks, it was one disruption after another. A surprise health inspection. A building code officer citing the community kitchen for minor violations. A fire marshal walking in during the lunch rush. Every inspection found something small to fix, but nothing major. Still, the interruptions were constant, exhausting, and costly. This isn't normal, Rachel muttered after the third surprise visit. No, it isn't, Daniel admitted. Whitfield has friends in city offices. He's pulling strings. Can't we report him? File a complaint? Not without proof. He's hiding behind official channels. The pressure weighed on both of them. Rachel snapped at staff over tiny mistakes. Daniel spent nights glued to his phone, chasing updates from lawyers and city contacts. Their evening planning sessions turned into stress-filled silences. I feel like we're under siege, Rachel said one night, slamming her pen down on a stack of compliance forms. Because we are, Daniel said, rubbing his temples. But we're not going to let him win. What if it doesn't stop? What if he keeps this up forever? Then we outlast him. We keep building. We keep serving. We make something he can't tear down. Rachel admired his resolve, but she could see how tired he looked. She reached across the table, taking his hand. Listen to me, she said softly. Every good thing in life comes with challenges. The fact that this is hard doesn't mean it's not worth it. In fact, it means the opposite. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the glass door. Standing outside was a tall man in a tailored suit, his silver hair gleaming under the streetlight. That's Whitfield, Daniel said quietly. Rachel's chest tightened. What does he want? Only one way to find out. Daniel stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Rachel watched anxiously through the glass. Marcus spoke with sharp gestures, his expression smug, his tone aggressive. Daniel stayed calm but rigid, his jaw tight. After 10 tense minutes, Marcus stalked off and Daniel came back inside. "What did he want?" Rachel asked immediately. "He offered to make all the inspections disappear, if I pull out of 3 projects and agree not to bid on 2 upcoming ones." Rachel's eyes widened. "That's extortion." "Yes," Daniel said grimly. "And now we know for sure he's behind everything." "What did you tell him?" "That I don't negotiate with bullies." "And?" "He warned things might get worse before they get better." Rachel's anger flared. "He threatened us." "He implied it." Daniel looked her in the eyes. "But I need you to know, I'm not backing down. Not ever." "Good," Rachel said firmly. "Because I'm not backing down either. This cafe isn't just my dream anymore, it's ours. And no bitter developer is going to scare us out of it." Daniel's expression softened, filled with love and pride. "Are you sure? This could get ugly." "I'm sure," she said. "We've built something beautiful here. We've built something worth fighting for. And we're going to fight for it. Together." He pulled her into his arms. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too," she said. "And I believe in us. Even when things get messy, especially then." That night, as they walked home through the quiet streets, their hands intertwined, they both felt the steel in their partnership. Whitfield could throw every obstacle in their way. It wouldn't matter. Because the strongest foundation wasn't money, or contracts, or business leverage. It was the simple, unshakable truth that they were better, and braver, together. 6 months later, Whitfield's harassment had backfired spectacularly. His abuse of city contacts came to light, earning him public censure and costing him several contracts. Meanwhile, Sunrise Cafe and the new Sunrise Community Kitchen were thriving. The City Business Journal eventually ran its article, but with a glowing angle, celebrating Rachel and Daniel's partnership as a model for community-driven development. "Sometimes the best answer to a bully," Daniel said, holding the newspaper, "is to just keep building until the truth speaks for itself." By spring, Sunrise wasn't just a cafe anymore, it was a hub. Jennifer ran the counter with ease. Marcus baked fresh pastries in the kitchen. Next door, bread-making classes, business workshops, and neighborhood meetings buzzed with life. Mrs. Chen called it a town square under one roof, and Rachel couldn't have agreed more. Then one Saturday morning, Daniel walked in with a box of flyers and a grin. "Good news," he announced. "What kind of good news?" Rachel asked, bracing herself. "The city council approved our proposal. We're going to be the pilot model for community-centered development in 3 other neighborhoods." Rachel's eyes went wide. "You mean, this thing we built here is going to spread?" "Exactly. We'll help other neighborhoods do the same, partnering local businesses with values-driven investors." Before she could respond, Rachel grinned. "I have some news too. The James Foundation wants to produce a full documentary on us. On the cafe. On what we've built together." Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "When I knocked on your door that night, I never imagined this." Rachel squeezed his hand. Not bad for what started as one little cafe. Then, as if on cue, the applause began. Customers were clapping. Jennifer was snapping photos. Mrs. Chen was in tears. And Marcus came out of the kitchen with a hidden bottle of champagne. Rachel turned, confused. That's when Daniel pulled a small velvet box from his jacket. "Next," he said softly, "we get married." Rachel blinked. "Are you proposing to me? Here? In the cafe? Where else?" Daniel smiled. "This is where we met, where we fell in love, where we built a life. Where else could it possibly be?" Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as he opened the box. "Rachel Carter, will you marry me?" Her voice was steady, certain. "Yes. Yes, absolutely." The cafe erupted in cheers as Daniel slipped the ring on her finger. He kissed her as glasses were raised and champagne corks popped. Rachel looked around at the joyful chaos, at the cafe alive with people who felt like family. She turned back to Daniel. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he said, his eyes shining. "And I love what we've built. Whatever comes next, I know it'll be beautiful." And as sunlight streamed through the cafe windows, they both knew the truth: the best dreams are the ones you build hand in hand, with kindness as the cornerstone, hope as the fuel, and love as the guiding light.